But Joseph's journey starts with a dream. And your and my journey starts with a dream. So I'm asking you, as we set up this message today, what's your dream? What's your goal? What are you asking God for? Or more than that, what has God said and placed inside of your life where He's taking you? What do you know is your dream that comes from God? Our story starts with a dream, but it doesn't end there. You know, we have this vision of what we think our future looks like, but God knows what it actually looks like. And those dreams that He sets in our heart are not meant to force us into a box, like if this is what He said, that's the end goal. No, what God does is He gives you what you need, that in the times of difficulty, you can hold on to hope. He gave you the dream, not because that's exactly what your life is going to look like. I mean, think about Joseph's dream. It was the sets of grain that were bowing down before him, and then it was a sun, moon, and 11 stars. And just note here, I want you to see that just for a second, just because it's beautiful. It was the sun, moon, and 11 stars. But Joseph was the 11th brother. His younger brother had not yet been born, so it should be the sun, moon, and 10 stars. But God will prophesy in the dream at the beginning of the journey what is coming at the end. And you can't define what that looks like, but when you get there, it's going to make sense. So instead of trying to achieve the dream, trying to gain the authority, let's grow so God can open the door for authority. All right, so this is Joseph's life. We've been looking at it to try and get out of it all the things that are meaningful to us. And I've said this a few times. I want to keep reiterating. This story happens in Genesis, and it's the family of the Bible. It's like if there was one family that's the most important family outside of Jesus, it's these guys, right? Because it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's son is Joseph. This is the family. Without this family, there is no nation of Israel, and there is no Jesus. And that means there's no us. There's no freedom. There's no life. It's super important who this family is. And this is God's story. This is His big, massive, life-changing story. And so we want to place it there. We want to allow this story in Genesis to mean more than just what's ambition for my life or success in my life. But at the same time, I want to learn everything I can from these practical stories and apply them to my life so that I can grow. And so what does the story look like so far? You'll remember, we're not going to go deep into it, but Joseph was the beloved son of his father. And he was betrayed by his brothers. So after the dream happens, his brothers begin to hate him because he's loved by his father more than any of them. And he's blessed by his father more than any of them. And so they decide they're going to kill him. And so step one, Joseph is betrayed by his family. Let's just think about this. 17 years old, betrayed by the ones who are closest to him. And his only crime was being loved too much. Super unfair. And Joseph is aware of this. I'm going to show you that in a moment, but he's aware of how unfair his life is. I feel like just in a moment of vulnerability for all of us, I think there are many times that you and I go through moments where we feel like, man, this is just unfair. Why am I going through this? What have I done to deserve this? Joseph feels exactly this way. His only crime was being too loved. And betrayed by his family, at least they didn't actually kill him. They just sold him into slavery. And so he was sold to this guy called Potiphar. And he was the captain of the king's guard. So he was a big deal in Pharaoh, because this is in Egypt. So there was Pharaoh, and there was the king's guard captain. That was Potiphar. So he's a big deal guy. We know the story. We explored it last week. And Potiphar's wife, faithful Proverbs 31 woman, right? Oh, no, she was not. She was ready to be unfaithful to her husband, and she saw that Joseph was handsome, well-built, good-looking. She said, let's sleep together. Joseph says no. And so we've gone through the story. The bottom line is that she grabs his coat, pulls his coat, and he runs and tries to get out of there. But then when Potiphar comes home, the wife is like, hey, your slave, your servant, tried to rape me. And so Potiphar loses it. It says he burned with anger, and he threw him in the king's prison. Now, the king's prison is not a place you want to be, right? The king's prison is, there's no getting out. If you go into the king's prison, there's only one person that can get you out. The king. That's it. There's no other way out of the king's prison. And so he goes from being the most beloved son, betrayed by his family, sold into slavery, betrayed by his master, and thrown into the prison. He goes from being the top to being at the very, very bottom. And he's a young guy. And in this moment, we said it last week, come on, you can't keep the greater grace of God down. Because when he was a slave in Potiphar's house, he rose through the ranks and became the second in charge of Potiphar's house. And when they threw him in the prison, he rose through the ranks. And for some reason, I mean, when you're a prisoner, you're nothing. No one cares about you. But somehow they saw something in Joseph that was so compelling. They made him in charge of all the rest of the prisoners. And the wardens didn't even worry about what was happening in the prison because they knew Joseph was there. He became the king of the prison. But Joseph knew something that some of us need to still figure out a little bit. Or maybe we felt it before, and it's going to come up on the screen. This is something that Joseph knew, right? The king of nothing is still nothing. Okay, watch this. Joseph goes into the prison, and in that place, he rises through the ranks and becomes the one who is over everyone. But the king of nothing is still nothing. If you're king of nothing, you're not ruling anything. And God took me for a moment, because we're talking about grow to go. This is not just about an intense story. There's something here for every one of us to see. Joseph knew something that we don't always know. The king of nothing is still nothing. But I've said this over and over again. Never devalue the season that you are in. We heard it in the offering message today. Don't look down on the difficult or desert season that you are going through, because it is in those moments. Come on, in the Old Testament, people flee into the desert to escape something, but in the New Covenant, people are led into the desert to learn something, led by the Holy Spirit. Come on, this is a huge thing for us to understand, right? Don't devalue the moment that you're in. Because you and I, when you put us in Joseph's shoes, we let our circumstances dictate our attitude towards where we are found. And when that happens, you become like everyone else. Watch this. If Joseph had decided when he got into that prison cell that it was all unfair, that it's not okay, that God has forsaken him, and that it's unfair, he shouldn't have been here, and he chose to let his circumstance dictate his attitude, he would have become like every other prisoner and just been quiet, lived out his life, and probably died in that prison. That would have been that. How many of us are going into a situation where we know there's more for us? We've got a dream from God, but when we find ourselves in that workplace and the circumstances come against us, we let those circumstances dictate our attitude. Everyone else is quiet quitting, so we basically just do the same thing. We become like everyone else, and we lose the influence God wanted for us. For some of us, we look at relationships out there and we're like, man, all the marriages are failing, so what's even the point of trying in mine? And we become like everyone else. But Joseph knew something that we need to learn. You do not let your circumstances dictate your attitude. You let God and His purpose dictate your attitude towards your circumstance. And when that happens, you rise to the top. And here's the reality. The only way you learn how to be king in the palace is to first be king in the prison. We heard it this morning as well in the offering. We got to learn what God is teaching us now so that when He opens the door, we're ready for what comes. We got to grow before we go. And you know what? That doesn't make it easy. I'm not telling you that it's easy, that now it's just easy to go to work when you have a bad boss or a bad system and it's not making sense. It's not easy to do those things. It's not easy to go home to someone who doesn't care, who is not about your feelings, who's not about your life, who's not about you, and just be like a good husband or a good wife. It's not easy to do those things. But when we choose to let God dictate our attitude towards our circumstance, that's when the supernatural changes things that we can't change. And that's where God starts to lead us towards His perfect plan for our lives. Don't devalue it. We look at it as nothing.